Hello, everyone, and welcome to CG's webinar, David against Goliath. There's an attractive biblical theme for you. And we've got with us today Dr. Patricio Sanchez Campos from Nottingham Business School. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment, but let me take you through the webinar protocols first. Remember, the webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to find it fairly soon, within a day or two, on our YouTube channel and through our website, which gets you into that YouTube channel, where you can find all of our webinars going back to the beginning of the webinar series. Quite a lot there now. There's about 300. So happy viewing. During the webinar, we advise you to keep your sound off, and you don't have to have your camera on either. But we do like you to turn them both on when you come into the Q&A part of the webinar. In fact, without your sound, we can't do much with your participation. So don't forget, when we bring you into the conversation in the Q&A part of the webinar, to turn on your mic. Most important. We advise you to use speaker view in the top right-hand corner there, with the big red arrow, because that helps you see who's speaking at any given time during the webinar. Now, to join the discussion, which starts roughly halfway through the hour, please use the chat function. Post your question or your comment for Patricio in the chat, and then I'll be able to select you into the webinar on that basis. We do this in two steps because sometimes people spontaneously come in and try and sell products or do other things unrelated to the webinar. So we do need to vet you a little bit by getting you to post in the chat first, to make sure your comment is going to be relevant. And when you're called in, and I'll send you a private message in the chat to say I'm about to call you in, you then turn on your mic, turn on your camera if you can, and then tell us who you are and where you are from, and then come out with your question or your statement. Now, do come in early into the chat to join the Q&A. We do have lots of cases where people come in the last 10 minutes and the speaking list is full and they miss out. So coming in towards the end of the speaker's presentation, around about 25 past or half past, is a very good idea. And you know, we do advise you to do it then. Don't forget to raise your hand, use the chat function to join the webinar. Okay, now let's meet Patricio. Well, he's a qualitative researcher. He's got an interest in consumer behavior, consumer vulnerabilities, and markets in higher education. And he's interested in exploring how marketing practices and market-oriented policies produce, reproduce, or resist social power relations, ideologies, social injustices, and social exclusion or inclusion for less privileged customers. So here we have interaction between the business side of higher education and the social theory, sociology side, and the interpretation of that interface. His doctoral research focused on students' representations in higher education, exploring alternatives to the students as consumer orientation. I'm sure that theme is going to be very interesting to many participants in the webinar, Patricio. So let me hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. There we are. Can you see that?
We can.
Perfect. Well, all right. Thank you very much. Actually, this is part of my my PhD dissertation, and I'm presenting a part of this because indeed the whole dissertation was about the students in the Chilean context, and of course because of that I had to ended up studying the policy itself. So I'm presenting, but certainly the work is also part of the work that was connected with my supervisors, Lisa Nixon and Heidi Winkelhofer, Katja Nemkova. So I'm Patricio. I'm from the marketing department at the Nottingham University Business School. So I'm based in Nottingham right now, and I would like to thank you and thank Christina for setting up this webinar. This is actually a piece of work that is being crafted for an article that is probably going to be sent out in the next couple of weeks for revision. Well, as we're probably very familiar with the policy agenda of markets in higher education. We're not going to I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we all know that this uh, agenda relates with the reduction of public spending, the removal of the obstacles to foster the market growth, and of course the massification of higher education that is expected to be 263 million by 2025. And of course, this has increased the private sector, and of course to cover this the massive sector, to cover the cost of the massive sector, we have had the introduction of tuition fees, and uh, the discourses that are reproduced from this agenda are, of course, the ideological values, belief, and hegemonic power of the market, and they are represented in what I call the discourses of the Goliath. And we are again familiar with, access to university as one of the most significant achievements, and tuition fees as a price mechanism that improved competition and efficiency. Students and families can select from competing providers, and of course, consider student fees are considered an investment, and then institutions are to be customer-oriented enterprises that respond to student consumer needs. Therefore, higher education is considered a private good. But this rhetoric uh, about self-regulating sector, freedom of choice, potential future income, notions of value for money, we all know has encountered a lot of criticism and opposing views. And again, we are again very familiar with the controversies. Um, um, we all know that higher education is not necessarily a perfect market. It's highly regulated. It still receives a lot of funds, and as Brown has argued, the lack of perfect information that is a basic premise in unregulated market doesn't work in higher education. We also have that since higher education is a credential of quality, and quality is difficult to judge. University has been setting high prices, naming tuition fees, to signal quality. Um, so tuition fees are connected with discourses of excellence and high quality, attracting, of course, the best qualified applicants. Um, Also, this consumption model is shifting the focus from a learning process, denying students the transformational potential of higher education. As William stated a while ago, the higher education as a private commodity is affecting not only students but also society. And because of that, students and families are being forced to get big loans, massive debt, and instead of nurturing publicly oriented citizens, we are producing commercially oriented individuals. So, uh, in this vein, I define discourses of the Goliath uh, discourses of the David, that states that the vibrant democratic culture recognizes higher education as a public good. University education relates to values of justice, freedom, equality. Um, Tuition fees as a price has resulted in a highly segmented system. Tuition fees has been damaging the citizens' right to be educated regardless of their financial means. Of course, promoting educational inequalities, inequities, fostering social and academic segregation. Uh, Simon and Brown and others have already stated that while the expansion of access, the expansion of access is compelling in market-driven system, the inability to control the prices and the increase in social inequality are probably the major drawbacks in marketization. And this is where we bring together these two big forces of the David and the Goliath. I would say the Goliath as the big one. So in this permanent controversy, the case of Chile emerged, providing us with an exceptional context. Um, so the Chilean higher education system has been described as one of the most marketized structures globally. Market-driven policies started in 1981 under the dictatorship of Pinochet, in the picture with Milton Friedman here. And higher education institutions moved from a model of state control to simply state supervision. There was a major private investment fueling a drastic expansion in the sector. As we know now, by 2016, 73% of the entire student population in Chile were attending a private institution. We discussed this last week with Carolina Guzman in London. And of these, two-thirds of the students attending these private institutions are classified as low and middle class students, according to the OECD. All of them being funded with money coming from their families or private banks, and later with government loans. Actually, the government loans were for many years only granted to low income, middle income students attending public institutions. That later was extended to private universities. This loan scheme was managed by local banks, initially charging very high interest rates. It was only in 2012 that the government introduced some regulations to limit the profits um, that the banking sector was making. So for some people, the Chilean higher education is a successful story indeed, because they believe that the high enrollment rates has been a core driver of Chilean's economics achievements. Um, um, but we can see uh, critics of the systems foreground that high education, high tuition fees have crippled the finances of these families, and they have also been pointing out at the low quality of many unaccredited institutions. So, although there was a dramatic increase in access, the uncontrolled growth and the relaxed state supervision allow many private institutions of questionable quality to operate. Um, Therefore, other people have been saying that the marketization of Chilean higher education has simply failed because it did not succeed in providing high quality education to low and middle class students, frustrating expectations of upward social mobility, and of course, ultimately enhancing economic vulnerability. And of course, that led, as we probably are aware of, an increased segregation and inequality in the society, generating massive movements that started in 2005 with the secondary school students, and then same students went to university, and we had what we call the Chilean winter in 2011, with students and families and workers contesting the neoliberal ideology, not only in higher education, but in many other sectors of the society, meaning pension, healthcare, primary education, transport, etc. Therefore, in 2016, there was a change in policy, uh, a policy that was discursively promoted as the return of the state and as part of a major political goal to bring back higher education as a public good in society. So, quoting here President Bachelet in those days, to reposition higher education in society and a step closer towards a major political long-term goal of reinstating higher education as a fundamental right. So, is this actually an effort to dismantle marketization? In fact, with this policy, and some undergraduate students have been able to have free education for the first time in more than 40 years. By 2022, 36 universities, 18 public, 9 traditional private, and 9 private, plus 8 professional institutes and Center for Technical Education have become part of the policy. And by 2022, more than 300,000 undergraduate students have been attending these institutions tuition free. So is this a David against a Goliath? So we decided to look at this from the perspective of the great Austro-Hungarian philosopher and Karl Polanyi, the ideas of Polanyi from the Great Transformation. Polanyi contends that marketization is a big complex phenomenon with consequences that go beyond the economic realm, affecting, of course, social, political, and even environmental aspects when a sector lacks of regulation. So, in his ideas, social inequalities are attributed to an extensive marketization of a market that is being disembedded from a social institution. Disembedded markets actually erode the sense of solidarity among individuals and uh, inciting to social crisis and prompting demands for social regulation. And he coined this fascinating concept that we believe can apply to this research, the concept of the double movement. When market-driven policies, as the one we have seen in this sector, has been stretched to the limits, when they've been applied to their limits, societies will try to reconfigure these market-oriented policies somehow. So the research is basically to understand how this case of Chile, the public policy of gratuidad, which is free education in Spanish, uh, is discursively represented in media articles. And we use a qualitative research following Fairclough, Norman Fairclough's approach for textually oriented discourse analysis. We had we have selected uh, discourse analysis and Fairclough particularly because we believe that representations are the production of meaning through language. Within this perspective, language choices and the use of metaphors do not simply describe the world, but are viewed as a key mean for defining and creating everyday realities, shaping our perception of the world. We selected for this article, for this research, 28 articles from two leading newspaper in Chile, with contrasting views, political views. One is El Mercurio, a right-leaning newspaper, very famous for the support of the neoliberal policies in Chile and for the dictatorship of Pinochet. And then we have El Mostrador, which is a left-leaning independent um, uh, media source. We have many more articles, but in order to have some balance in the corpus, we selected 14 from each side. And then we did the search and the research and using some selected keywords, students, higher education, free education, equality, and equity. The articles were read and reread, and then the discourse analysis, um, textually oriented discourse analysis was applied. So our findings showed three main topoi, three main concepts, that images that emerge from the text. The first one is gratuidad as a flawed, ill thought out, and mistrusted policy. The second one was gratuidad as an obstacle in promoting equality. And the third one was gratuidad as a social revolution for the future. I'm going to review some quotes from the different articles that were analyzed that best represents these um, images. So for the first one, the analysis reveal the resistance to any changes to the higher education system. If you have a minute to read the quote from El Mercurio, the effects and impacts of the reform are so far limited. To say that there will be better quality opportunities, greater equality, less segregation, a more organized higher education system is not serious at all. This belongs to the worlds of Bacon's idols, failure to reason clearly and confuse reality with wishes. The promised free education has created more chaos than benefits. So what we see here is that the quote is negating any benefits and prompting the reader to see Gratuidad as an ill-designed reform, not meeting its original aim, or causing more problems than fixing them. With a higher education system that is celebrated as one of the primary engines for the economic development of the country, the text is trying to persuade the reader to see the new free system as deceptive, uh, a reality mixed with fantasy that is presented in the metaphor of Bacon's idol when referring to government promises of a better higher education system. Um, there's a discourse of failure, anarchy, and confusion in the design of the policy. Quote, the promised free education has created more chaos than benefits. So in this adverse narrative, the wider effect of higher education as a public good seems highly questionable. By the time the government started discussing Gratuidad, the system has been, shaped by market practices for 40 years. And of course, El Mercurio was a powerful media source that was strongly supported of the neoliberal move in Chile. So we have another quote here. There's still no good reason. It is costly, doubtful, from an access point of view, and highly regressive. The argument that access to education is a social right and that requires decommodification is theoretical and empirically weak. So again, the language is casting doubts about the aims, nature, and the effects of the policy, and we see that across the board from different articles from El Mercurio. This extract is actually reproducing an economic and a financial discourse that contests the notion of education as a social right. And then we have the second quote. In 2011, the year in which the fallacy of free education was installed, a large part of Chileans preferred to act freely rather than suppressed by the machinery of social equality. A long time ago, we said that the reform would cause serious damage to our young people. If approved, it will undoubtedly turn them into dependents of socialism, into slaves of the states. So here, sentences like the year in which the fallacy of free education was installed, or the machinery of social equality, those sentences are aimed at seeding doubts about the origins of the policy to reveal the true intentions of the government. Words like installed or machinery, they're serving in constructing Gratuidad as a policy whose aim is purely political, implying that the social and student movement that triggered the change was either planned or simply organized by a socialist government. Phrases like Chilean prefer to act freely and don't let the socialists come and tell us that we must finance higher education is of course a free economy and a political discourse reproducing the ideals of the market, and they allude to the freedom of choice, rejecting any government intervention. And in these quotes, the reader is again prompted to consider Gratuidad as a negative effect in society. Actually, is evidenced as a harming effect by illustrating students as prisoners of a particular ideology. So as the analysis of the metaphor prisoners revealed, one is losing the personal freedom, which is the ultimate danger in a country in which personal freedom has been fundamental for everybody. The second image that we found in our findings unveiled somehow unexpected portrayals of Gratuidad as a burden in advancing social equality. Um, this is just information that we need to know to understand this bit, because the policy was initially implemented in 2016, but then it was amended in 2019 when it was designed to benefit, well, it was originally designed to benefit exclusively low-income students attending public higher education institutions. The amend in 2019 extended this to other private providers with certain conditions, mainly accreditation. So in the first quote, we have a profound reform of tertiary education to all students from all spheres, inclusive access to all, universal free education for all, um, every student in higher education. So what we see here, it's that uh, private providers, they see themselves as genuine contributors to social justice and equality, and they were not incorporated in the policy. In the second quote, why poor students who want to study here, this somebody from a private institution, are not able to receive support, but the Council of Rector Universities, which are the public ones, universities of lower quality sometimes and with lower levels of accreditation get that financial support. We are one of the very few that has students from all the neighborhoods, from all the counties, a very well balanced. We are a radically inclusive university. So here the text is juxtaposing funding for public institutions with the lack of funding for students attending private institutions. So it serves against the position that all higher education institutions deserve free education despite their origins or funding sources. The statistical discourse at the end is used to legitimize the demand to extend the policy. Uh, Finally, we have the last picture of Gratuidad, a representation of Gratuidad as a social revolution and as a force for radical social change. So in contrast to earlier press articles, and this is interesting because articles that were published in El Mercurio, the right-leaning newspaper, um, whose we know their editorial line is a strong supporter of neoliberal ideas, started defending Gratuidad as a radical change or as a remarkable change towards a more equitable society. So this transformation represents moving from an education conceived as a consumer good to an education as a guaranteed social right. All the above is historic, uh, a new educational paradigm, and a promise of a greater equality and inclusion. So here, Gratuidad is represented as a significant turning point also, uh, the, and a change in the nature when they use the metaphor, this transformation represents. Uh, the word like historic evidence the intention of the author to claim that Gratuidad represents a genuine revolution, which is, then strengthened by the philosophical discourse about a new paradigm in higher education. Um, then we have a milestone was met this afternoon where the MPs dispatched the reform. By advancing on free education, we want to build a more equitable country with equal opportunities for all. Um, Again, there's a combination of metaphors and lexical choices here about uh, the collective effort. We want um, to alter the status quo and collectively construct a more equal society. This is representing actually a major U-turn away from the individualistic neoliberal discourse uh, that has dominated the country for decades. I will end up this with a final quote that is again reproduced in one of the El Mercurio's article, representing the sense of togetherness, gratuidad as an opportunity to promote a more collective and equal uh, country. Chile is better today than tomorrow. This temporal discourse emphasizes the transformational power of the approval of gratuidad, and it certainly conveys some kind of certainty of the transformation for the higher education system and for the society as a whole. In our discussion, we certainly find out that the neoliberal society finds very difficult to understand this public-private notion, something that we've been discussing lately in this group. Probably some of you that were in London last week, we talked about this. The discourses keep legitimizing the neoliberal policy in higher education, and the media discourses reinforce that social power of certain groups and intellectuals trying to influence society. Then we have, there's evidence that the similar neoliberal discourses are reproduced from the different sources, and both media discourses try to perpetuate the narrative of the successful market-oriented policies, the freedom of choice, and again, higher education as a commodity. But also there's this some sense of confusion and inconsistency that is validated with several lexical choices. And this is actually aligned with what Simon has said before, the political definition of what is public and what is private in higher education. And based on that state, non-state distinction is also found when the policy was implemented, but then it had to be amended for all those private universities that were left out in the initial policy of 2016. Then we have uncertainty and vulnerability of the private higher education students. That's why the text is reproducing a negative impact of gratuidad in these students. The media discourses are reproducing some notions of a better future, and there is a potential power of wide-ranging influence of this particular policy in this particular sector to be extended to the rest of the Chilean society. In our conclusion, and to finish here, we believe that we have, again, two big forces now. We have certainly the Goliath, the hegemonic market language is strongly replicated and defended, trying to stop any changes in the social order, and of course undermining the sense of solidarity and collectivism that is produced by a disembedded sector like the higher education sector that we're talking today. The free choice and individualism as part of the market ideology is resisted against any notion of social justice and equality. Certainly from the lens of Polanyi, again, the disembeddedness of the market in higher education is supported by the discourses that are reproduced in media. But we have a David, and the David is Gratuidad emerging as an image, maybe a small step towards a more equitable society. The change in policy, which has been reproduced as a significant turning point in the system, can be portrayed as a social demand for regulation, just as Polanyi stated before. And Gratuidad's attempts to reshape the policies, the market policies in higher education, could be somehow interpreted as a Polanyian double movement towards a more equitable society. Gratuidad can be seen as a rising force to re-embed the higher education sector in society, just as it was before the policy of 1981, when the dictatorship changed the system. I was with Chris Millward last week in this event in London, and where Simon and many others were there. And in a very informal conversation, Chris said, "It will have to get worse before it gets better." I don't know if Chris is here or not, but I'm using his quote. And I think we're yet to see of what is happening in our side in this sector in the UK. These are pictures, of course, from the 2010 in London, but the discussion is there, and the discussion is still around. So with that being said, I think I'm within my time frame, Simon. Thank you very much. There's a lot of reference here, so I'm just going to put that there for now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Patricia. That was quite substantial and a lot going on there, isn't there? It's a complicated problem, Chile, because you've got competing traditions, different universal ideas, none of which are implemented fully or adequately or consistently. Governments pushing one way and then the other. Changes of government in a polarized environment, where the polarization in this sector seems, on policy issues, seems as great as in any sector. So you get a succession of sort of half-completed reform projects which attempt to undo what's already there and put something else in its place. What's couple of questions about where things are heading before I bring in Helen Carasso, who's our first questioner. What do you think the options are for the Gabriel Boric government? I mean, what can it do? I mean, given that it's inherited a half free and half tuition paying system, it's got a loan structure which it's not comfortable with and needs to undo and replace in some way. But all of these things tend to cost more money. So recasting the system in a consistent way by sort of effectively paying out the costs of the previous loan system and so on, is quite a formidable fiscal problem. And they're of course not politically guaranteed. A future. The next election may lead to another change of government. So, what do you think they can do, and what do you think is most likely to happen?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Simon. Well, it's a very complicated question with a very complicated answer indeed, because we have a policy that, as you can see, a lot of people were against it, even though there was a massive movement fighting for it. People have been questioning the amount of resources that this is actually costing, particularly now that we have seen the full implementation of the policy with students taking longer than expected. And then the policy has to be amended again because the students were taking more than the 5 years that an undergraduate degree takes. So apparently the arguments from the right wing side is like, okay, well, when something is free, it's not really valued, so students are taking longer, and that also comes with the economic discussions about, are we really able to fund this as we expected? Apparently this was a, again, discourses that emerged in the media. This was a political movement just for the moment to actually to calm down the masses, and the political movement didn't consider the long-term costs of having free education. When we analyzed the data, we saw several arguments say by 2025 or whatever, 2027, a certain amount of students are going to study for free, but nobody talked in those days how much that was going to cost. So Boric now, which is the current president, which is actually one of the student leaders in those movements in 2011, he is being faced with the contrasting positions of being on the left side of the socialism, very left side of socialist ideas, with the controversy that the government doesn't have the money, for instance, to waive the big massive debt of the students. There's another political discourse around in the last couple of years, particularly when he came into office, about waiving the loans that the students had when they went to university, particularly those bank loans that were extremely expensive. But the conflict is, okay, we would like to because that's our ideals, but there's no money for this. And again, we have a very concentrated media that is really managed by the right wing, saying, okay, there's other, just like in the UK, right? There are other needs that are as important as education. For instance, health, public health, or for instance, primary education, which is somehow left out in this policy. What is that is going to happen? I can't predict the future, but I think there's going to be more changes in terms of the accreditation conditions. The universities that are going to be able to actually access the policy, or they're going to be able to work under the policy, are going to be those are really highly accredited and high quality institutions. We are in using economic terms, we're in that moment that the sector is kind of stabilizing, I would say.
The problem of trying to stabilize things requires a sort of normative consensus about the way the system is designed and the way what it's intended to achieve. And there seem to be, as far as I can see, sort of three broad positions you can take to try and establish support for. One, of course, is the market position that says it's all a market, it's all commodity. It's basically about private good. And then this is, the sort of language of the Brown Report in the UK in 2010, that it's that the direct beneficiaries are the students, and they're the overwhelmingly the main beneficiaries of the system. And then if there are public goods that, the benefits to other people apart from the students themselves who are being educated, then they are spillovers from the private market, that those public goods can arise, but that they're essentially going to be funded by the market operation. That's one position. The other extreme, of course, is you say it's all a public good, that there are private benefits and they're sort of contained within the public sphere, and that the beneficiaries, if they benefit more than other members of society, they pay back through increased taxation because their income earning is going to be higher. So in other words, the sort of the private goods, if you like, are sort of regarded as a sort of a subset of the public. The third position is the sort of middle position, which says, okay, it's a shared good, it's a shared benefit, it's public and private, and we'll try and establish a stable basis for a cost sharing, and we'll say it's, the only obvious one is 50% privately funded, 50% publicly funded, acknowledging the public benefits may be in some way normatively distinguishable from the private benefits and so on. So they're the three positions, but it seems to be very difficult for governments to really go hard towards one or the other, although Chile made an attempt to go hard towards the market position, and so is the UK. Most governments don't go all the way. And there are, if they tend towards the commodity side, then there are some subsidies. If they tend towards the public good approach, there are some private charges and so on. So, and it all slips and slides around because there's no clear normative basis for any particular cost share and any particular notion of the public and private benefits in any stable way. It's very difficult in Chile because you've got people pulling really hard towards the market, and you've got people pulling really hard towards the public good approach. No one's really seriously trying to work that 50-50 idea, although that might be the only way through. And the problem with a purely public good approach in Chile is that 3/4 of the institutions are private sector.
Yes.
So they're not really obliged to the public, even though they say they are. They're not really, and they can pick and choose how public they are, in effect, in their mission. So I don't know, what's the way through all of that? Do you think it's possible to push for a completely public approach? Do you think a cost sharing approach, a middle position, is better? Which way should it go?
Well, just mention, 73% of the student population 75% go to a private institution. And this comes something that happened during the 80s and the 90s, where the market policies were so extreme that there was no regulation whatsoever. And because of that, the chances of becoming an entire system into a public system, I don't think any options there. Certainly, we are in a way in a mixed sector, public and private, from the funding perspective, because many of these private institutions that they saw the changes, they envisioned that this was going to change. They started to work harder in order to get better quality in terms of lecturers, and started to get more research and things that make them higher quality institutions. So they are receiving now, they're fully private, non-for-profit, fully private institutions receiving free education. So we are seeing that mix. My question would be more about, will be continue as it is, because of two reasons. One, it has to do with the cost. And in a culture of marketization, the economic discourses is embedded in the society. So we keep listening and hearing the economic discourses about, we are in a small country. Why are we doing this when not even the big countries? Again, the example is the UK. We are in a small developing country in what world where we're thinking, when we did this, we don't have the money, so there's no way we're going to go further with this. That's one thing. And the other thing that is not directly related with what I presented today, but it's part of the research that I was doing. It's about, is actually this producing more citizen-oriented individuals, or is this actually promoting democracy? Is this all the money that is going to single people, single individuals, actually affecting the way we see the concept of a public good? Apparently not, because again, it's not part of this research, but we don't see that change in behavior from the students, which are the direct beneficiaries of this yet. So it's a long-term challenge. And again, it will probably relate with the question that Ellen asked, but yeah, there's some controversies within the society at the moment saying, okay, well, we are paying for this, but do they actually deserve? Are they being more committed with, let's say, with the voting, with the elections? Are they being more politically involved? Are they actually doing something better for the society? We are yet to see.
I'm going to hold Helen just one second longer. Let's try and connect it to the UK
Cool.
as well, because you've done that, Patricia, a bit already. My colleague at Durham, Vicky Bolivar, has just come out with a paper at the sociology conference, which is going on sort of today, which does a comparison of a large number of countries' higher education systems. And she's using the Esping-Anderson welfare regimes categories, the sort of liberal market, conservative, and social democratic are the three main groupings. And the commodity ones are commodification systems, are, of course, the Anglophone ones and Chile and others. But one of the things she shows is that in the last 15 years, the UK has moved from being one of the commodification systems in the liberal market category to an extreme position within that group. So that, by saying that the student is the sole beneficiary, in effect, through the financing system, by abolishing all government funding for teaching for 3/4 of students in first degrees, it's taken the most extreme marketisation position in the world. You're sitting in the UK now. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think the UK is in that position? Is that how you read it? Is the UK more marketised than Chile?
Well, I think we have a system that works differently here also, because we have the massive intake of international students, which doesn't happen in Chile, and certainly if we look at the system from that perspective, certainly it's a highly marketized system. I believe, just because of the policy of free education, I believe that the UK overpassed the markets in Chile now, in that sense. We're seeing students in massive debt. We already saw some initial movements in 2010. We don't know if that's gonna happen again, but again, like Chris was saying last week, it has to get worse before it gets better. I certainly believe that the UK is in a very complex moment, and probably because it's way more marketized than any of the other countries that we have analyzed before. Yeah.
Helen, please come in.
Thanks, Simon. And thank you, Patricia. It's really interesting. One of the issues that comes up quite often in these discussions about changing higher education funding is the issue of of differences between generations. People talk here about pulling up the ladder behind the generation that had grants and free education. And of course, in America, they're now starting to talk about loan forgiveness, as you mentioned. And again, there are issues about intergenerational issues there about who gets it and how and when. Is that something that's come up in the Chilean context? And if so, how's that reflected in both the discourse and the policy?
Well, from the research itself, certainly there are some elements showing that not of unfairness, but fairness, in the sense that many of these students that are receiving the free education now are the children of students that had to pay tuition in the early 90s, and many of them middle class families struggle now to send their kids to education because of they are already paying their own debts from those days. I think we passed that generation already that went to a university in Chile for free. Many of them are either gone or they're retired now. So we don't have that sense that education was free once before. But this generation now is being supported by their parents, and they're agreeing with this basically because it's cheaper for them to send their kids to university. At the same time, the same parents are the ones that are complaining and manifesting and protesting because the promise of the government to waive the loans that they took in those days is not happening, because again, because of that conflict that the socialist government has, that we don't have money to waive the loan. Not like just President Biden did a few weeks ago in America. Everybody was expecting, okay, this is going to be an announcement in Chile, but no. So there is a sense of unfairness that, okay, I went to university, I had to pay, I'm still paying, and now you're going for free. Now, for the families that had children that are being benefited by the policy, yeah, they agree. They see this at least it's fair for them as a family, as a whole. Lovely to see you here, Ellen, by the way.
Now let's bring our next two colleagues in. Stephen Darwin first, and then I'll bring in Jorge Delgado. So Stephen.
Thanks, Simon. Can you hear me okay? I'm just on some headphones that I haven't done. Okay. My name is Stephen Darwin. I'm in Chile, in Universidad Hurtado. Look, I worry a little bit about some of the kind of pessimism that comes with the analysis that we're doing here. I mean, I understand when we do dichotomous analysis, we see the right has this position, the left has that position. I'd like to talk a little bit about methodology in a minute. I'll get to that. But just one thing I wanted to highlight was one of the effects of the Gratuidad has been to force private universities, if they want to participate in the system, to, as was mentioned, to divest from being a profit-based structure. And the largest university in the country, which was previously a rapacious, profit-driven university, has had to move into a not-for-profit, has had to set up a sort of a foundation to run it. And even though they have long-term kind of capital commitments to the former owner laureate, they are still, it is ideologically reforming things that will be difficult to unravel now they're in place. And I think that's an important nuance of the system. At the same time, one of the effects of Gratuidad has actually, ironically, been to lower the costs and to lower the income of both private and public universities in the country, because the amounts of revenue coming from government are less than were previously there. So there's also been a potentially negative effect within institutions, which has created another dynamic amongst universities about the affection for the Gratuidad itself. So it's quite complex. So I think it's a really interesting sociology at the moment of how this policy has had different effects. But look, that aside, I just wanted to ask one question about methodology that I wasn't clear from in the presentation, and that is, when we talk about an article, particularly like in El Mercurio or in El Mostrador, there's two types. There's an opinion piece, which is a polemic, which is, putting a position and advocating a view, and then there's kind of a news posture, and I just wasn't clear whether from the analysis it was the kind of the opinion pieces that were the core, because they sound to me like more opinion driven rather than actually how the kind of the pseudo objectivism of a news report would be. And I just wonder, was it editorial, was it opinion, or was it news that formed the basis of the analysis?
Yeah, good point. just to comment on the first comments that you were mentioning, in fact, is also a challenge. I used to work in Chile for years, 15 years in a public institution, and I can see now from my previous colleagues that the struggle of the universities are facing is because the fees are capped, just like in the UK. So the government is passing the money to the university at a certain level, but the cost of one student is way higher than the price that the university is actually funding. So there is another discussion behind doors about how we're going to face the financial situation of the universities in the future, which is again surprising considering the situation in the UK. But yeah, that's a conversation that hasn't emerged publicly yet, and if you are within the sector, you understand that many universities are facing this challenge. Regarding the data collection method, well, we selected articles within that range of keywords, and of course some of them were editorial, some of them were actually news reports, and in many of those news reports there were actually people that were interviewed in those reports. So it's a range of articles. We didn't want to have just an editorial as a representation of the newspaper. We wanted to see a broadened aspect of what the newspaper was trying to present to the public, and that's why I think we see that after a couple of years, the right-leaning newspaper El Mercurio was trying to adjust with what the society was showing. Okay, everybody, the policy was approved. There's nothing we can do now. We try to adjust to the situation, because again, it was quite surprising to see words emerging from a Mercurio in that sense. And in this kind of presentation, you can only show bits of those quotes, but from the analysis, you can see that bottom line in somehow that right-leaning newspaper was supporting the change in policy. Yet to see, like Simon mentioned, we're having a new government in the next year. Most likely it's going to be a right-wing government again. And this is, again, another discussion that we'll see in 3 or 4 years from now. Thank you, Stephen.
Time will tell. Time will tell.
Thanks, Stephen. Now quick, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So
thank you.
Let's try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Jorge Delgado and then Cristina Cavallo. I'll take the two together. And please hold your answer until you've got both of them. Jorge first, please.
Oh, so thank you very much. It wasn't a question. It was mostly like a comment acknowledging the importance of doing this type of research, looking at how media portray or could mold the public opinion on issues, in particular in higher education. I've seen projects, for example, from Gustavo Fishman, from Arizona State University, doing the same model to analyze how higher education is portrayed in media. So I think it's very valuable, very important. It connects what happens in the academia and in that way, and the narratives that are moving around in the society. So thank you for this presentation. Very, very interesting.
Gracias. Thank you.
Let's bring in Cristina. Hi, Cristina.
Hi, Simon. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Nice to meet you, Patricio. It's really nice research. I'm from Brazil. I'm working at University of Brasilia. And this is a good question. It's a good subject in Brazil, because in Brazil, 25% of enrollments are public, like Chile, but completely free for a long time from the Constitution, more than 30 years. But 75% are private, but majority are for profits. This is a huge problem now in Brazil. This is my subject of research. And I'd like to ask you, is there a legal provision for profit higher education institutions in Chile, like in Constitution in Brazil?
Yeah, thank you very much. Lovely to meet you, Cristina. Thank you. I always like to go back to the articles that Simon has been writing about the hybridity between public and private. And in Chile, we have this very specific case. Again, 75% of the students go to a private institution, and because of the excessive market policies, many of those were uncontrolled growth, and they had a very low quality. Because of that, the policy that was finally approved in 2019 decreed that no more-for-profit universities in Chile are allowed. So that's why Laura International left the country. And it was actually passed to a non-for-profit charity. So the only way for university to be under the Gratuidad, the policy, in order to offer Gratuidad to their students, they needed to be non-for-profit. And because so many universities had so many students that were from that particular range in terms of income, low and middle class, they didn't have any other option than to become charities or non-for-profit institutions. Some of them, they didn't do it happily, but they had to because of, again, the big amount of students. Some others simply decided to sell, and they sold it to non-for-profit organizations, like the case of Laura. Laura completely left the country. That we don't have Laura International in Chile anymore. And it's actually, it was part of the policy. The policy is a huge policy that included many other aspects. I just looked at the policy from the higher education sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I think if you look at the last 30 years of system development around the world, and you reach the conclusion that those systems that have gone hard on marketisation as their primary modus operandi or primary mode of development, as in the case of Brazil and India, have got themselves into a really deep hole. And the UK is certainly heading towards a deep hole with its system, with its fully marketised system, with, you know, galloping crises in relation to standards and expectations, ultra commodification of the product, narrowing the framework of higher education in, I think, unacceptably to most people. But, you know, in continuous debate, never resolved about quality and about mission. And those systems which have maintained a public approach have essentially, even if they've got some mixed funding elements, been able to manage quite well by comparison. The US, highly marketised, but it was very heavily subsidised at the same time. And that now that the public subsidies are being wound down in the US, you see the contradictions and problems of the market system really emerging. You know, compare the British national health system with the education system. It's quite bizarre, really, to compare the two, because national health, completely public good approach. You know, universal access, free at the point of delivery, public sector dominates provision. Yeah. Private sector's in there, but it really is quite secondary. But all of this likely to be unwound by the next Labor government, which is facing tremendous problem of keeping it going, and looks like opting for selective privatisation, and the slippery slope begins. National health gets unwound. But, you know, compare national health, public good approach in the UK with higher education, complete private good approach. You know, the same culture has produced both of these systems. It's unfortunate that higher education seems to be an area which people think can be more freely privatised, because it's a minority business, it's an elite activity to some extent. Yeah. It's more vulnerable for that reason, I think, and there's probably greater capacity for private families to support part of the cost because of its character. Anyway, Patricia, really valuable to have you on, and thanks for the excellent presentation and
thank you very much.
Answers to questions. Please come back again.
I will.
When you've got more to bring forward to us. I think the way which you presented, as well as the nuances and subtlety of your analysis, was really appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Our next webinar, as you probably all know, is, because Chris has announced it already in the chat, is life course trajectories and wealth accumulation in the United States, comparing late baby boomers and early millennials. So a chance to get your teeth into the US system, the big dominant US system, still the most important in the world in many ways, and shaping how the rest of us see things. And that'll be next Tuesday at 2 p.m. UK time. So we look forward to seeing you then. Hopefully you put your clocks on for the daylight saving, which has shifted all of our times by an hour since the 1st of March. Thanks, Patricio.
Thank you very much.
And bye for now to everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.